We're now going to look at some words related to science and research. The first word is assess. Assess. This is a verb. It has a couple of meanings. Number one, to carefully consider somebody or something in order to make a judgment about them or it. Number two, to calculate the cost, value, or amount of something. In the word family, we first have the noun assessment. That has a couple of meanings. It can mean the act of assessing, or it can mean an opinion or judgment about somebody or something that has been carefully considered. Then we have the noun assessor. An assessor is a person who assesses somebody or something. Then we have the adjective assessable, and that means able to be assessed. Here are some collocations. To assess behavior, to assess improvement, to assess performance, to assess progress, to assess the effect or effects of something, to assess the effectiveness of something, to assess the extent of something, to assess the impact of something, and to assess the quality of something. The researchers are trying to assess the effects of climate change on local forests. Some real estate agents are coming over tomorrow to assess the value of the house. Next we have bias. Bias. It's a countable and uncountable noun. It has a couple of meanings. It can mean an opinion or feeling towards a person, group of people, or idea that is often unfair and influences your judgment. When it has that meaning, it's similar to the word prejudice. It can also mean a special ability or interest in a particular thing. The verb is also bias, and that means to unfairly influence or have an effect on something. The adjective is biased, and that means unfairly showing a preference or having a particular interest in one thing more than others. Here's a usage tip. It is often followed by against or towards. For example, this industry has a strong bias against older employees. There is a bias towards hiring Ivy League graduates in this company. In case you don't know this name, the Ivy League is a group of very prestigious universities in the US, like Harvard and Yale. And here we have a few collocations. Gender bias, political bias, racial bias, and unconscious bias. Unconscious bias is bias that you're not consciously aware of. Scientists need to be careful not to let personal bias affect their research. It is clear that that newspaper has a strong political bias. The English course has a bias towards communication skills. That means that the course mainly focuses on communication skills. The next word is breakthrough. Breakthrough. This is a countable noun. A breakthrough is an important development or discovery that helps to improve a situation or solve a problem. The adjective is also breakthrough. and that means very important in the progress or development of somebody or something. And then we have a phrasal verb, which is break through. In a scientific context, this means to make new and important discoveries. Here are some collocations. A historic breakthrough, an important breakthrough, a major breakthrough, a scientific breakthrough, a significant breakthrough, a technological breakthrough, and then we have to achieve a breakthrough and to make a breakthrough. A research team studying the causes of Alzheimer's has recently made a major breakthrough. The 1900s was a century full of countless technological breakthroughs. There has been an important breakthrough in the trade negotiations. Now we have deduce. Deduce. This is a verb, and it means to reach an answer or a decision based on the available information or evidence. In the word family, we first have the noun deduction. Deduction is the process of deducting. And then we have the adjective deducible, which means possible to discover based on available information or evidence. And then we have the adjective deductive. That means using the knowledge that you have in order to understand something. It's often used in the phrases deductive logic or deductive reasoning. Here's a little usage tip. It is often used with from. For example, what can we deduce from these test results? After they carried out the experiment, they deduced that rabbits were just as smart as cats. From the mess in the kitchen, I deduced that Frank had been cooking. Now we have the verb detect. Detect. It has a couple of meanings. Number one, to discover the presence of something using a machine or scientific methods. Number two, to notice something, especially something that is not obvious. Let's see the word family. First we have the noun detection, and that means the process of detecting. Then we have the noun detector. A detector is a piece of equipment that is used to detect things. And then we have the noun detective. That's a person, especially a police officer, who investigates things. And finally, we have the adjective detectable, which means able to be detected. The computer has detected a virus. Here are some collocations. To detect a change, to detect a difference, and now with some adjectives. Difficult or hard to detect, easy to detect, impossible to detect, and possible to detect. Large amounts of mercury were detected in the river. Detecting a disease early can often increase your chances of recovery. I detected a hint of sarcasm in Frank's voice. Now we have the verb disprove. Disprove. This means to prove that something such as an idea, statement, or theory is wrong or not true. Here we have some collocations. To disprove an argument, to disprove a claim, to disprove the existence of something, to disprove an idea, to disprove a statement, and to disprove a theory. The scientists provided data which completely disproved the author's claims. The theory that the Earth is flat has been repeatedly disproved. This word is empirical. Empirical. It's an adjective. It means based on experience or scientific tests, and not on ideas or theories. The adverb is empirically. Then we have a couple of nouns. The first one is empiricism. That means the belief in basing your ideas on practical experience. And then we have empiricist. That's a person who believes in empiricism. Here are a few collocations. Empirical evidence, empirical knowledge, empirical research, and an empirical study. There is empirical evidence which shows that exercise improves mental health outcomes. The economists are conducting an empirical study to analyze how choice overload affects consumers' purchasing decisions. Choice overload is having an excessive number of choices. Now we have experiment. Experiment. It's a countable and uncountable noun. It has a few meanings. The main meaning is a scientific test done to discover if something is true or how something reacts under certain conditions. It can also mean the act of conducting such tests. And it can mean the process of trying a new idea or method to see what happens. In the word family, we have the adjective experimental, and then the adverb experimentally. We also have the verb experiment, and that means to do a scientific experiment or experiments, or to try or test new ideas or methods. And then we have the noun experimentation, and that means the activity or process of experimenting. Here are a couple of usage tips. Number 1, do not confuse experiment with experience. Number 2, it is usually countable. When it is uncountable, it is usually preceded by the word by experiment. The right combination of chemicals was discovered by experiment. And here are a few collocations. A controlled experiment. A field experiment. That's one that takes place in the real world, not in a laboratory. A laboratory or lab experiment. Lab is just an informal way to say laboratory. A scientific experiment. And then with a few verbs, to carry out or do an experiment, and to conduct or perform an experiment. Those mean the same thing as do or carry out an experiment, but they're more formal. The researchers are conducting an experiment to see how direct sunlight affects different types of plastic. We reached our conclusions by observation and experiment. As an experiment, the company decided to let employees work 4 days a week instead of 5. Now we have the word fusion. Fusion. It's a countable and uncountable noun. It has a couple of meanings. Number 1, the process or result of combining or joining two or more things. Number 2, the process in which the nuclei or centers of atoms join, resulting in the release of large amounts of energy. The verb is fuse. That means to join together physically or to combine different things. There you can see a very simple diagram of nuclear fusion. Here's a little usage tip. It is often followed by of. For example, brass is a fusion of copper and zinc. Spinal fusion is surgery which involves permanently joining two or more vertebrae. Musical theatre is a fusion of several different performing arts. Nuclear fusion reactions occur in the Sun, but it is difficult to produce such reactions on Earth. Next we have guinea pig. Guinea pig. This is a countable noun. It has a couple of meanings. It can mean a small animal covered in fur with short ears and no tail, and which is often kept as a pet. It can also mean a person who is used in an experiment to test a product, treatment, system, etc. In the picture you can see a guinea pig, the animal. Like all pets, guinea pigs require care and attention, but they are easier to look after than dogs. The professor was asking students in her classes if they wanted to be guinea pigs in her latest experiment. Next we have hazard. Hazard. It's a countable noun. A hazard is something that could be dangerous or cause damage or problems. The adjective is hazardous, and that means involving risk or danger. The verb is also hazard. That has a couple of meanings. It can mean to make a suggestion or guess that you know might be wrong, or to risk doing something that might cause damage or problems. Down below, you can see various signs that warn people of hazards. Here's a little usage tip. It is often followed by to. For example, some visitors to the park leave litter on the ground, which is a hazard to local wildlife. And here are some collocations. An environmental hazard. That's something that can be bad for the environment. A fire hazard. That's something that is likely to cause a fire. A health hazard. A major or serious hazard. A potential hazard. A safety hazard. In the picture there, you can see a safety hazard. A traffic hazard. And then with a couple of verbs, to cause or create a hazard, and to pose a hazard. To pose a hazard means to be a possible hazard. The research team is studying whether the pesticide poses a hazard to the environment. Tobacco companies have tried to downplay the hazards of smoking. To downplay something means to make something seem less important or serious than it is. The policeman asked Frank to move his bicycle from the middle of the road because it was a traffic hazard. The next word is hypothesis. Hypothesis. It's a countable noun. A hypothesis is an idea that attempts to explain something based on some known facts, but that has not yet been proved to be true. In the word family, we have the adjective hypothetical. That means based on a situation that is not real, but that might happen. The adverb of that is hypothetically. And then we have the verb hypothesize. That means to form a hypothesis. Here are some collocations. to confirm a hypothesis, to formulate a hypothesis, to prove a hypothesis, to support a hypothesis, and to test a hypothesis. The experiment seemed to confirm the hypothesis that sugar is addictive. Scientists are still unsure about what caused the extinction of dinosaurs, but several hypotheses exist. And yes, the plural is hypotheses. Next, we have the verb immerse. Immerse. This has a couple of meanings. It can mean to put somebody or something in a liquid so that they or it are completely covered. And it can mean to involve somebody completely in an activity. The noun is immersion. That means the act of immersing somebody or something. The adjective is immersive. This is usually used to talk about games or performances. If something is immersive, the player or viewer feels totally involved in the experience. These cherries are immersed in water. And here are a couple of usage tips. It is usually followed by in. If you immerse mushrooms in water, they become softer. For the second meaning, it is often used reflexively, to immerse oneself in something. For example, to distract myself, I immerse myself in my work. In our experiment, we are observing what happens when you immerse different types of wood in water. The language program aims to immerse students in the local culture. Next, we have the verb implode. Implode. This has a couple of meanings. Number one, to collapse towards the center with force. Number two, of an organization, system, etc. To fail completely and suddenly, usually because of internal problems. The noun is implosion, and that means the act of imploding. Some stars explode and become bright supernovas, while others quietly implode and become black holes. The country's economy imploded due to mismanagement and a series of poor financial policies. Now we have inaccurate. Inaccurate. It's an adjective. It means not entirely correct or exact, or not functioning correctly or exactly. It is the opposite of accurate. The adverb is inaccurately, and the noun is inaccuracy. That means a statement or thing that is inaccurate, or the state of being inaccurate. Here are some collocations. Inaccurate data. An inaccurate device. That's a thing that doesn't work how it's supposed to. An inaccurate graph. Inaccurate information. An inaccurate reading. A reading in this context means a measurement shown on some sort of measuring device. An inaccurate statement, and an inaccurate weapon. The research group believed that the report's conclusions were based on inaccurate data. Navigational devices were quite inaccurate before the 1700s. And now we have the adjective inconclusive. Inconclusive. This means not producing a clear decision or result. It is the opposite of conclusive. The adverb is inconclusively. Here are some collocations. inconclusive discussions, inconclusive evidence, an inconclusive report, inconclusive results, an inconclusive study, and inconclusive tests. Because of the inconclusive blood test results, the doctor decided to perform a biopsy. A biopsy is when tissue is removed from somebody's body so that it can be examined. The trade discussions were inconclusive, so the two countries have decided to meet again in 3 months. The next word is nucleus. Nucleus. It's a countable noun. It has a few meanings. Number 1, the central part of an atom that consists of protons and neutrons. Number 2, the central part of most cells of living things that contains DNA. Number 3, a small group of people or things that are the most important part of something larger. The adjective is nuclear. The red part is the nucleus of this atom. The green part is the nucleus of this cell. Nuclear energy is released when the nuclei of atoms split into several parts, fission, or fuse together, fusion. Cells usually have one nucleus, but some have no nuclei and some have many. There are 5 of us on the sales team, but Jack and Amy form the nucleus. And yes, the plural is nuclei. Now we have the adjective potent. Potent. This has a couple of meanings. It can mean having a very strong effect on your mind or body. And it can mean very powerful or effective. The adverb is potently. And the noun is potency. That means the power that somebody or something has to affect your mind or body. And now a few collocations. A potent drink, a potent drug, a potent medicine, a potent painkiller. And we also have a potent force, a potent influence, a potent symbol, and a potent weapon. The new drug is highly potent and should only be taken in low doses at first. Remember that drug can also mean medicine. The poppy is a potent symbol of World War I. In the picture you can see a poppy. It's a type of flower. Next we have the adjective preliminary. Preliminary. This means happening before a more important action or event, especially to prepare for it or introduce it. The noun is also preliminary, and that's an action or event that is done in preparation for something or to introduce something. And now some collocations. If I've put them in the plural form, it's because they are usually plural. A preliminary draft, preliminary findings, preliminary inquiries, preliminary remarks, preliminary research, preliminary results, a preliminary stage, and a preliminary study. After doing a few preliminary studies, the researchers decided to apply for funding to conduct a large-scale project. The preliminary results are promising, but more trials need to be performed to confirm the efficacy of the drug. Now we have a phrasal verb. This is to rule something or somebody out. It has a couple of meanings. It can mean to decide that something is impossible, or that something or somebody is not suitable, or to make it impossible for something to happen. Here's a usage tip. It is often used in the phrase, rule out the possibility of or that. For example, the scientists ruled out the possibility of sunlight being the cause of the chemical reaction. We can't rule out the possibility that ants were the culprit. They still don't know what's wrong with Michelle, but the doctors have ruled out cancer. In other words, they said that Michelle definitely doesn't have cancer. Frank wanted to run for mayor, but his young age ruled him out as a potential candidate. In other words, his age made it impossible for him to run for mayor. Now we have the verb scrutinize. Scrutinize. In British English, it ends in se. This means to examine or look at somebody or something very carefully. The noun is scrutiny, and that means careful and complete examination. This scientist is scrutinizing a sample using a microscope. The professor scrutinized the document, looking for any possible errors. During the interview, I felt like the interviewer was scrutinizing my every move. Your every move just means everything that you do. Now we have the verb soak. Soak. This has a couple of meanings. Number one, to put something in liquid for a period of time, or to be in liquid for a period of time. Number two, to make something very wet, or of liquid, to be absorbed in large quantities. Let's see the word family. First we have a couple of adjectives. Soaked and soaking. Both of those mean very wet. Then we have the noun soak. That's an act of soaking something. These limes are soaking in juice mixed with salt. If you soak steel wool in vinegar, the iron in the steel will begin to rust, and this chemical reaction produces heat. Steel wool is what you can see in the picture. The rain soaked the towels that were left on the clothesline. I changed my bandage because blood had soaked through it. Now we have test tube. Test tube. It's a countable noun. A test tube is a small glass container that is shaped like a tube, is open at one end, and is used in laboratories. It's what you can see in the picture. Here's a usage tip. When talking about fertility and reproduction, the term test tube baby is sometimes used. A test tube baby is a human baby created by fertilizing an egg with sperm outside of a woman's body and then transferring the egg to the uterus. The term is not very scientific because the egg is actually fertilized in a petri dish, not a test tube, but it is often used in the media. In English, this process is called IVF, in vitro fertilization. We poured the two chemicals into a test tube to see how they would react. So far, the drug has only been tested in test tubes, but researchers are hoping to start clinical trials this year. Clinical trials are ones performed in people. Now we have trial and error. Trial and error. This one isn't actually a word, it's a phrase, but it's very important to know for scientific contexts. It means the process of finding a good method by trying various possibilities and learning from your mistakes. Here's a usage tip. It is often preceded by or through. For example, no one taught me to cook. I just learned by or through trial and error. And lots of burned meals. Some cures for diseases are discovered by accident, and some are found by trial and error. The author said that learning to write a good novel was a process of trial and error. Next we have the adjective underlying. Underlying. It has a couple of meanings. Number 1, real and fundamental in a situation, but not always easily noticed or clearly stated. Number 2, lying under the surface of something. The verb is underlie. That means to be the basis or cause of something. The underlying soil here is very fertile. In this case, that would be the soil that's under the grass and other plant material. And here are some collocations. An underlying assumption, an underlying cause, an underlying condition, an underlying message, an underlying principle, an underlying problem, an underlying reason, and an underlying theme. This new medication aims to treat the underlying cause of the disease and not just the symptoms. The underlying rock here is very porous and contains a lot of water. Porous means having many small holes. Now we have the adjective viable. Viable. It has a couple of meanings. Number 1, of a thing, able to work or succeed. Number 2, of a living thing, able to develop and survive independently. The adverb is viably. The noun is viability, and that means the state of being viable. And here are some collocations. A viable alternative, a viable business. That's a business that can make a profit. A viable option, a viable proposition, a viable solution. And then we have commercially, economically, or financially viable. All of those mean capable of producing a profit. Researchers are trying to come up with a viable solution to the water shortages in that region. Frank's idea of starting a donut hole shop doesn't sound commercially viable. I realized that the plants didn't grow because the seeds weren't viable. And the final word for this section is vial. Vial. It's a countable noun. A vial is a small bottle made of glass, or sometimes plastic, that is usually used for medicine, perfume, or blood. There you can see various types of vials. Each vial contains 5 doses of the vaccine. When I had a blood test, they took 3 vials of blood. I'd like to talk to you a bit about what it's like to study science at university. The first thing I'd like to say is that you shouldn't be disappointed if what you do in your first few years doesn't seem overly new or exciting. It's unlikely you're going to achieve any significant breakthroughs or disprove any major theories as an undergraduate student. But that's fine because it's important to learn the basics. And if you're lucky, a professor might ask you to assist with some preliminary research. In many classes, you'll likely do experiments. In chemistry, for example, you might soak or immerse items in certain chemicals and then try to detect a chemical reaction. Or you might do tests to see how potent a substance is. For these types of activities, you'll be using items like Bunsen burners, test tubes, vials, beakers, and petri dishes. In the beginning, they can be a lot of fun to play around with, but you need to be careful because there are lots of safety hazards in laboratories. When I was studying, one student managed to set the whole room on fire, and the windows imploded. Before you do these types of empirical tests, your professor might ask you to first formulate a hypothesis. You'll then get to see if your hypothesis was correct. Don't worry if your hypotheses are sometimes incorrect, because an incorrect hypothesis can allow you to rule out certain possibilities. And a lot of science involves trial and error. And don't stress if your results are sometimes inaccurate due to mistakes you made, or if certain results are inconclusive. You're there to learn, and making mistakes is part of the process. However, in any type of science subject, it's important not to let bias affect your judgments or conclusions. You need to be able to assess and deduce things objectively. You'll also be expected to scrutinize things like results and data to check if there are any inaccuracies or underlying factors that might have been overlooked. One exciting area of science that appeals to many students is nuclear fusion. This is when the nuclei of atoms join, producing energy. It's a process that occurs in the sun, but it is not yet viable as an energy source on Earth because current fusion technology isn't advanced enough. Another thing to be aware of is that when you're a science student, professors and other students may ask you to be a guinea pig in their experiments. That might sound scary, but don't worry, nowadays there are very strict rules about what can be done to people in experiments.